Hello, my name is Evan Foss. I'm an engineer, and this is the short form version of my talk about battery electric buses on the MBTA. In 1987, the MBTA ripped out the elevated orange line to what we now call Nubian Square. This is perhaps the most famous act of transit racism to my generation, but sadly, there were actually many more before that point. The T once operated a very extensive network, and it shrank significantly for white people's cars to have an easier time sailing through. The effect of this is most apparent in the disparity of who gets a bus versus who gets rapid transit now. Historically, it's strange that we're here talking about this, as the MBTA at peak operated some 40 trackless trolley lines. The T ran its trackless trolley system in some form for 99 years, only shutting down the last of it in Cambridge in 2022. All fully electric, zero emission. Which finally brings us to the subject of the video, battery-powered buses, or BEBs, which are the latest and greatest unintentional downgrade this community will be receiving. The burning bus you are looking at is the same make and model the MBTA just ordered 80 of, with plans for more later. The NTSB identified the source of this fire as a coolant leak. There's a conductive liquid that's used to keep the battery from ironically catching fire, and it caused a short inside that system. The system now has been designed so that the coolant leaks out onto the ground in the event of a fault, but I'm seriously concerned about how you move the bus after that. My friend Alan, also an engineer, asked what happens if somebody backs one of these into a pole or gets rear-ended in the middle of rush hour, and the MBTA's response was, "We expect everyone to egress quickly." The bus does have an onboard fire suppression system, but it can only handle a diesel fire. I have a lot more to say about the energy storage systems in these buses, but I'm trying to keep the talk short. The lithium-ion battery in it is made with cobalt, mined with child labor in the Congo. The average life expectancy for those miners is 25. Now, there are safer chemistries that don't use that material, like lithium titanate, which are less prone to fire. They're used in newer bus designs like the ones in Dayton, Ohio, and oops, no, wait, that's a trolley bus. Now, the MBTA is reasoning that all electric buses cost basically double what a conventional hybrid diesel bus costs, but at least these battery buses will save us on the cost of all that overhead wire, right? Well, no, because their recharge time and their range mean that they will actually have a replacement ratio. That's the ratio of current buses to battery buses required to replace them. In their own presentations, the T estimates that this should not exceed 3 battery buses to every conventional one, but in more realistic testing of similarly configured vehicles in Minnesota and Duluth, this number was actually 4 battery buses to every conventional one. Since, as I said, they cost double, this is actually 8 times the price just to replace a bus. That works out to $6.4 million, which is greater than the $5.5 spent on each car for the Green Line extension, making us wonder, how do you accomplish mode shift doing this? Now, the reason these buses cost so much is the size of the battery, so it's a shame you couldn't solve this problem by using a modestly sized battery to run the bus for short lengths off some sort of continuous charging system. Oh, no, wait, that's a trolley bus in Seattle where they're expanding the trolley bus network. Oops. At least this will solve all our emissions problems, right? Well, the battery buses don't have the power to run their heating systems without losing 40% of their range at minimum in cold weather, so they ended up adding a diesel heater, meaning that they're not really zero emission. There is some data in the unreleased Hatch report to suggest that there would even be an 85% increase in particulate emissions, but more concerning to me as an engineer is actually that this would require charging the buses at night when we have very little renewable energy. The same Hatch report also contains interesting changes from its earlier versions to its later ones, which leads me to believe the T pushed Hatch to distort the figures in favor of battery buses. But at least the MBTA is building the battery bus infrastructure for the future buses, the ones that can go over 120 miles on a charge and don't take 6 to 8 hours to recharge and won't require a diesel heater. Well, no, because all three of those expectations require a lot more electrical power per bus, and the plan is to buy 3 charging stands to every 1 power supply, and the problem is that supply is not rated for their combined power. So if they go to use more than a third of the chargers at a time, they would have to charge for a much more extended period. Pennsylvania's SEPTA stepped on nearly all the rakes by first buying battery-powered buses that cracked in half and then caught fire, and then switched over to hydrogen-powered buses they couldn't afford to fill. Finally, they've gone back and are going to buy in-motion charged trolley buses and are considering expanding the wired network because they had the good sense to not cut it down in the first place. One final and particularly concerning observation is that the MBTA chose to save money on their bus depots, which were spiraling upward in price, by reducing the scale of the fire suppression system to a standard they set themselves. This saved $600 million on the Quincy one, and the Cambridge one does not appear to have a fire suppression system for the bus yard. Imagine being like San Francisco, who not only recently bought trolley buses that are in motion charging, but also has an extensive network to run them on. The positive in that plan being that you could ultimately move the lines back to being light rail by upcycling the power supply systems that you'd be installing for the trackless trolleys. There are communities the T has promised more and better to in the past, and they even have documentation showing they could wire them in a timely fashion. It is said in transit circles that people would not accept a return to overhead wire, but I believe they're a lot smarter than that.